The woman in the worn apron stood frozen at the community center's entrance, her weathered hands still clutching a mop, as the words cut through the air like shattered glass. Why should we listen to someone who cleans toilets for a living? And in that single moment of cruelty, 5 years of carefully guarded secrets began to unravel. Because Margaret Chen wasn't who anyone thought she was, and the truth would change everything. It had been exactly 5 years, 2 months, and 16 days since Margaret had arrived in the small town of Millbrook with nothing but 2 suitcases, a heart heavy with grief, and a desperate need to disappear from a life that had become unbearably lonely, despite, or perhaps because of the fortune she'd accumulated. And she had taken a modest apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, furnished it with thrift store finds, and quietly applied for a position at the Millbrook Community Center, a weathered building that served as the heart of this working-class neighborhood where single mothers brought their children for after-school programs, where elderly residents gathered for weekly lunch, and where hope sometimes felt as scarce as money. Margaret had scrubbed floors, organized donation drives, served meals, and truly listened to the struggles, dreams, and stories of people who had welcomed her without question, never knowing that the woman who mended their children's torn jackets and slipped extra food into their bags had once lived in a mansion with 12 bedrooms, or that her late husband's tech company had been worth hundreds of millions, or that she could have bought every building on Main Street without denting her bank account. Because what good had all that wealth done when Richard died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving her alone in a cold, enormous house filled with expensive things, but empty of genuine human warmth, surrounded by people who wanted her money, her connections, her influence, but never simply her. She had fled that gilded cage, leaving her adult daughter Jessica to manage the family foundation and business interests, cutting herself off almost entirely because Jessica had become everything Margaret feared calculating, status obsessed, viewing every relationship as a transaction, and Margaret had needed to find out if anyone could love her, need her, value her for simply being a kind human being, not for the commas in her bank account. In those 5 years, she had found something precious. She'd found Claire, a struggling single mother of 2 who worked double shifts at the diner and still showed up every week to volunteer at the food pantry. She'd found Emma, Claire's 8-year-old daughter, who loved books, but whose school library was pitifully small. She'd found Mr. Patterson, the 17-9-year-old veteran who ate every meal at the community center because his pension barely covered rent. She'd found Maria, the teenager with an exceptional voice but no money for music lessons. And she'd found purpose in their struggles, meaning in their resilience, and joy in their simple gratitude. When she anonymously arranged for the community center's heating to be repaired one brutal winter, or when someone's medical bill mysteriously got paid, or when scholarships appeared for deserving students, small acts of kindness that cost her money but gave her something wealth, never had genuine connection and the satisfaction of helping without recognition. But tonight, at the community center's town hall meeting about the building's potential closure due to funding cuts, everything had gone wrong when Margaret had stood up to speak, suggesting they could find alternative funding sources and offering to research grant opportunities. Her voice calm and confident from years of running corporate charity boards, and Dennis Morrison, the self-important owner of Morrison Auto Repair, who served on the town council and had always treated Margaret with barely concealed contempt, had sneered at her, his voice dripping with condescension as he said, "Why should we listen to someone who cleans toilets for a living? No offense, Margaret, but this requires business expertise, not mop and bucket wisdom. Maybe stick to what you know and let the real professionals handle the finances." And the room had fallen into uncomfortable silence as Margaret's face flushed with humiliation. Not because she was ashamed of honest work, but because the casual cruelty revealed how some people valued others solely by their perceived status. And she was about to quietly sit down, swallowing the hurt as she'd learned to do. when the community center door burst open with such force that everyone turned to stare. Standing in the doorway was a woman in an immaculate designer's suit, her expression a mixture of fury and desperation, and Margaret's heart stopped because it was Jessica, her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in person for 5 years, though they'd exchanged brief, strained emails monthly, and Jessica's eyes swept the room before locking onto her mother, and she strode forward with the commanding presence of someone used to corporate boardrooms, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum, and she stopped directly in front of Dennis Morrison, her voice cutting and cold. "Did you just insult my mother? Did you actually just condescend to Margaret Chen? The woman who donated $40 million to children's hospitals, who built schools in 6 countries, who ran one of the most successful philanthropic foundations on the West Coast, who has a business degree from Harvard and an honorary doctorate in humanitarian work. Did you really just tell her that she doesn't understand finances?" The room erupted in confused murmurs, head swiveling between Jessica and Margaret, who had gone pale, her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling with every word, and Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Emma tugged her mother's sleeve in confusion, and Mr. Patterson leaned forward, his weathered face creased with bewilderment, and Dennis Morrison's smug expression melted into uncertainty as Jessica pulled out her phone, projecting images onto the community center's wall, photographs of Margaret at charity galas, newspaper clippings about her philanthropic work, articles about the Chen Family Foundation, and Dennis's face drained of color as he realized whom he'd just insulted. "I came here tonight," Jessica continued, her voice shaking now with emotion rather than anger, "because our foundation's financial team discovered something strange for 5 years. Anonymous donations have been funding projects in this exact town, medical bills paid, scholarships awarded, building repairs completed, and when I traced the accounts, they led to my mother, who I thought had abandoned me, who I resented for disappearing, but who apparently has been living here, working as a janitor, and secretly helping an entire community while living in poverty by choice." And tears were streaming down Jessica's face now, her polished composure cracking, "and I came here angry, ready to demand why she'd rather be with strangers than her own daughter. But now I see all of you, and I see how you're looking at her with real affection, real respect, and I realize you know her in a way I never did, because I only ever knew the wealthy Margaret Chen, the foundation director, the widow of Richard Chen. But I never knew this woman who apparently scrubs floors and listens to people's problems and shows up to every community event, and maybe that's why she left. Because I made her feel as worthless as that man just did, unless she was being useful in some monetary way." The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with shock and revelation, and Margaret stood slowly, her legs trembling, her eyes meeting her daughter's across the space that felt simultaneously like 5 feet and 5 years, and her voice when she spoke was soft but steady, carrying the weight of long-held truth. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Jessica. I left because I didn't know how to show you that love isn't transactional, that people have value beyond their usefulness, that kindness without recognition is still kindness. And I was afraid I'd failed you as a mother, because you'd learned to measure everything in dollar signs and networking opportunities, just like I had for too many years. And when your father died, I realized that all our wealth meant nothing because we'd isolated ourselves, surrounded by people who wanted something from us. And I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked how I was feeling without wanting a donation, or invited me somewhere without expecting a generous gift, or valued my opinion rather than my checkbook." Margaret's eyes swept the room, landing on Claire, whose expression had shifted from shock to understanding, and on Emma, who still clutched her mother's hand with innocent confusion, and on Mr. Patterson, who nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place, and she continued, "I came here to find out if I could be loved for who I am, not what I have, and you, all of you, gave me that gift. You invited me to birthday parties in cramped apartments. You saved me seats at community dinners. You asked my advice about your children. You'll let me read bedtime stories and organize coat drives and simply be useful in ways that had nothing to do with writing checks. And yes, I helped financially when I could do it anonymously, because those problems were real and I had the means to solve them. But what you gave me was worth more than anything I gave you. You gave me purpose, connection, and the feeling that I mattered as a person, not as a bank account. Claire stood then, her eyes red, but her voice firm. You paid my daughter's medical bills last year, didn't you? When she had pneumonia, and I was drowning in debt, and the hospital called to say an anonymous donor had covered everything. That was you. And Margaret nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, and Claire crossed the room and pulled Margaret into a fierce hug, whispering, you sat with me in that hospital for 3 days, brought me coffee, braided Emma's hair, never mentioned money, just showed up as a friend, and that mattered more than the bills. Though God knows both saved my life. One by one, others stood. Mr. Patterson, whose voice cracked as he thanked her for the winter coat that had appeared in his locker with a note, saying someone had donated extras. Maria, the teenage singer, who realized her mysterious scholarship had come from Margaret. The Johnson family, whose house fire recovery had been supported by an anonymous fund, and each testimony added another layer to the portrait of a woman who had given not to be praised, but to genuinely help, who had found more satisfaction in anonymous kindness than in the recognition-filled philanthropy of her previous life. And even Dennis Morrison stood, his face burning with shame, and offered a stammering apology that Margaret accepted with grace, because she understood that people often judged others by superficial measures when society taught them that worth equaled wealth or status. Jessica approached her mother slowly, and the years of distance and misunderstanding hung between them like morning fog, and Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. I've been so angry at you, but I see now that you weren't running from me. You were trying to show me a different path, and I was too stubborn to follow, too wrapped up in maintaining the foundation, the business, the image, and I forgot that charity begins with actually caring about people, not just causes. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for making you feel like you had to choose between wealth and love, between helping people and being yourself. And Margaret took her daughter's hands. These hands that looked so much like her own, but had felt like a stranger's for so long, and she said, you didn't fail me. Sweetheart, I failed to teach you before your father died that our worth isn't our wealth. And these 5 years weren't about punishing you or abandoning you. They were about learning the lesson myself so I could finally share it with you properly. And look at these beautiful people who taught me that the richest life is one filled with genuine relationships, honest work, and kindness given freely, without expecting returns. The community center meeting had been completely derailed from its original purpose of discussing closure, but in its place, something more important was happening: healing, understanding, and the bridging of worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. And when Emma tugged on Margaret's apron and asked in her clear child's voice, Miss Margaret, are you really rich? Does that mean you have to leave us now? The question cut to the heart of everyone's fear, and Margaret knelt down to the child's level, smoothing back her hair with a tenderness that was pure and uncomplicated, and she promised, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You are my family, and money doesn't change that unless we let it, and I won't let it. Not ever again. Jessica, wiping her eyes, looked around the humble community center with its peeling paint and mismatched chairs, seeing it perhaps for the first time not as a charity case but as a community. And she made a decision that surprised even herself. The Chen Foundation would like to partner with Millbrook Community Center, not as a silent donor, but as a collaborative effort. I'd like to come here regularly to learn from all of you about what real community looks like. And yes, we can provide funding to keep this place open and expand its programs. But more importantly, I want to learn what my mother learned, about connection and purpose beyond spreadsheets and tax deductions. And the tentative hope in her voice showed a crack in the corporate armor. A daughter finally ready to see what her mother had been trying to teach her. In the weeks that followed, Millbrook transformed in unexpected ways. The community center remained open with proper funding, but Jessica kept her promise, showing up every Saturday in jeans instead of suits, learning names instead of just demographics, serving meals alongside Claire and Margaret, listening to Mr. Patterson's war stories, and slowly, painfully, beautifully rebuilding the relationship with her mother through shared service rather than shared wealth. And Margaret watched her daughter's transformation with quiet joy, seeing Jessica laugh genuinely for the first time in years as Emma taught her a clapping game, seeing her tear up when Maria performed at the community talent show, seeing her understand that true wealth is measured in moments of connection, not dollars in accounts. Margaret kept her small apartment above the hardware store, kept her position at the community center despite Jessica's protests, because she'd learned that meaningful work, regardless of pay or prestige, feeds the soul in ways that luxury never could. But she also reconciled with her wealth, understanding that money itself wasn't the enemy. The isolation and transactional relationships it could create were, and used properly, wealth could amplify kindness rather than replace it, could open doors rather than close hearts, and she began to find a balance. No longer hiding who she was, but no longer leading with it either. Simply being Margaret, volunteer, friend, donor, mother, and human being worthy of love in all her complicated, multifaceted wholeness. Dennis Morrison became one of the community center's most dedicated volunteers. His humiliation transformed into humility and his condescension into genuine service, and he often said that being utterly wrong about someone was the best thing that ever happened to him because it shattered his assumptions about worth and work and forced him to examine his own prejudices. And Margaret forgave him fully because she understood that they'd all been prisoners of different kinds of isolation, his of narrow-mindedness, hers of wealth. Jessica's of ambition. Freedom came through connection, vulnerability, and the courage to be seen as fully human, flaws and all. On the 5-year anniversary of Margaret's arrival in Millbrook, the community center held a celebration that was partly town party and partly family reunion. And as Margaret stood surrounded by people who loved her, Claire and Emma, Mr. Patterson, Maria, the Johnson family, Dennis and his wife, and most importantly, Jessica, who had moved to an apartment just down the street and joined the community in earnest, she realized that the insult that had shattered her secret had actually been a gift, because secrets, even well-intentioned ones, create barriers, and true connection requires the courage to be fully known. And she'd been known now in her poverty and her wealth, in her service and her generosity, and loved not despite these contradictions, but because of the whole, complicated, beautiful human being she was. Margaret raised her glass of simple fruit punch in that modest community center with its now repaired heating and freshly painted walls, surrounded by mismatched decorations made by children and potluck dishes that represented a dozen different family recipes and budgets. And she offered a toast to the richest life I've ever known, not because of money, though I'm grateful to have it to share, but because of you, who taught me that wealth without connection is poverty, that honest work has inherent dignity, regardless of pay, that kindness costs nothing but means everything, and that family isn't just blood but the people who show up, who see you, who love you not for what you can do for them, but for who you are. And I am wealthier in this moment than I ever was in my mansion, because I am known, I am loved, and I am home. As everyone raised their glasses and cheered, Jessica put her arm around her mother's shoulders, and Margaret leaned into her daughter's embrace, and the two women who had lost each other to grief and misunderstanding stood together in a room full of genuine love, having learned the hardest and most important lesson, that true wealth cannot be hidden or hoarded, that it grows only when shared freely, and that the richest inheritance we can leave or receive is not money or property, but the example of how to live with open hands, open hearts, and the courage to be vulnerable enough to let ourselves be truly known and truly loved.